So yes, we'll expect a report back. Good. Right. Strategic outcomes, the vision statement, the vision thing.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. This has been a matter that's been talked about in relation to our collaborative advisory group people, seeking to have something in the district plan which sort of sets out what the outcomes are going to be when the district plan is implemented here. So what I've tried to do is give a bit of an introduction there in 3.3.1. So this is a piece of paper that's got orange on it and it's headed up strategic outcomes for the district plan.
You carry on.
Yep, you're right, okay. So in the introduction there, tried to sort of set out the role of the district plan. It can't do everything for all things. Setting out the... Has anyone got it? Anyone got it?
Not yesterday, Friday. How many people are missing it?
Could you share? Could you look? Yeah. Thank you. Carry on.
Okay. The second part in 3.3.2 is just identifying the urban development strategy did have a vision for the greater Christchurch, and that's set out there. That's not new to you. That's been before you before. We've also set out in section 3.3.3 there are some community outcomes and just identifying that those are perhaps a little bit older, but a number of them are still relevant to what we're doing in terms of the district plan. In 3.3.4, just setting out that a lot of the things we're talking about in terms of what the district plan is seeking to do are already in the strategic directions part of the district plan, which is section 3.5. And basically saying those strategic directions sets out a number of requirements for the district plan. They've got to either give effect or must not be inconsistent with other documents. And I've listed a couple of those there being the recovery strategy, the land use recovery plan, central city plan and the regional policy statement. So then leading from that sort of overview of where those various documents are seeking to direct Christchurch and the wider Banks Peninsula area, I've then developed under section 3.3.5 what I've called some strategic outcomes, which is about the form, the function and the structure about the Christchurch district. And that's really the sort of thing that a district plan does. It's the land use tool. So it's telling you about what's the form, how does it work, and how does it set itself out. What I've tried to do is just set out some basic principles there, and those are listed. Principle 1 is about the urban extent of the Christchurch city component of the district. And those bits are that we're within defined urban edges, and we're integrating into our new greenfield areas. The second part, the urban form, basically setting out what the role of the central city is, neighbourhoods around suburban centres, and a network of commercial and industrial areas. Third principle is the balance of the district in terms of its urban form, which is our rural and coastal settlements, and basically setting out there that those continue to function basically within their existing boundaries and for the purposes that they're carrying on at the moment. Next, principle 4 is about housing, and these will be very familiar to you coming out of the residential chapter about sufficient supply, types and densities of housing throughout the district to provide for that all of life, higher density around some of our commercial centres and our new urban areas, and traditional lower density residential in our suburban parts. Accessibility, principle 5, this is coming out of the transport chapter that we've talked about, Some strategic corridors providing the gateway and linkages to some of our important infrastructure, particularly the port and the airport. I'd suggest that that first sentence doesn't read particularly well, and I'd like to have a crack at rewriting that a wee bit. I think I have read it again and it doesn't make particular sense, so I'll come back to you with that. Also, we've talked to you about that the transport network is integrated, and we're looking at promoting active travel, public transport. So that's the other principle about accessibility. Principle 6, natural hazards, coming out of our natural hazards chapter. Basically about development being in places where we can manage those risks from flooding, tsunami, earthquakes and land movement. Principle 7 is about equality environments, and this goes back to looking at ensuring the places we build, we design them, that they're of a human scale, and they're places where people are wishing to live and work in. Principle 8 is about respect for the past and healthy environments. This is probably going to come through to you in the next chapters, which are about heritage and natural environment. Also a number of the general standards around noise and various other amenity matters. So those principles are there about looking after the natural and built environment, and also looking at the role of Ngāi Tahu in recognising that. So those are the ones that I pulled out. I'm not here to write a vision statement for you. I've had a bit of a go at that, but really that's something that comes a little bit more from the politicians rather than from staff. So happy to take comments and amendments on that.
Glenn, Phil.
Thank you. Occasionally we'll hear the argument over housing affordability of building on the urban fringes, including over the line. Having seen this now encapsulated as principles, and just giving your view, what would that do? You know, if a council proceeded to do that, does that weaken a plan if those urban boundaries aren't so well defined?
Well, I think we've got very clear direction coming from the higher order documents, particularly the regional policy statement. A number of clear things: put your urban development within the boundaries, very clear directions about no rural residential on the urban fringes of Christchurch City. So I think we would have some real difficulties if we wanted to move outside that specific direction.
Phil?
Can I just ask you, under the principle of accessibility and the promotion of active travel and public transport, does that being a principle, does that in fact give those forms of transport some sort of priority in planning, or that they be essential components of any road?
No, I don't know that it gives it a priority, because the first part is making sure it's an integrated approach. So I think, always we're going to have that fundamental need for managing transport, the private and the public transport. What this is about is saying we want to move towards something which is promoting the active mode, which ties in with the cycleway development that the city's putting forward, and also the public transport infrastructure. So it's not making one more important than the other, it's indicating where you're wishing to go.
And because it's a principle, though,
Yes.
would it be fair to say that residents could expect those
Correct.
components to be there?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yanni?
Yeah, I'd really think around the issue of health, we need to have more, it's actually about public health as well. So things like contaminated soils, things like asbestos, there's a whole bunch of stuff that post-earthquake has come up. Mm-hmm. So I just think that needs a bit more work around, around the health kind of.
Yes.
I don't know from our workshop or our little retreat that we had whether you guys have seen what came out of that.
We have.
So has that fed into this thinking at all? Or?
No, not at this stage, I would be honest. We're actually having a meeting about that tomorrow within the SPG group, and there is a distinction here, I guess, about what you would put in a vision statement for a district plan under the RMA versus under the Local Government Act. So no, I wouldn't say that has been included in here at this stage.
So what does this actually mean? Like, if people go through, try and get a resource consent, and they've broken 10 rules, but they come and read the strategic directives and say, well, you know, I'm providing housing, high density housing with and around a larger commercial centre, so your strategic objective is to do that, so I should be given a consent. Don't worry about the rule. Is that basically how this works?
You're correct. That's one of the reasons why we haven't, from a staff point of view, been actively promoting this vision. The district plan, the matters that you need to have regard to objectives, policies and rules. Those are the guts of what the district plan's about. Once you get into things like vision statements and what have you, you are dealing with matters which actually aren't fundamentally required in a district plan. And I mean, Brett might like to comment on that, but certainly the court will be looking at the objectives and policies, and if they're good and clear, then they won't move outside of those objectives and policies. They'll focus on those.
No, that's the way it stands at law. The vision statement isn't an objective, it's not a policy. So when someone applies for a resource consent application under section 104 of the RMA, you have to think about effects on the environment, you have to have regard to objectives and policies of the plan, you have to give effect to the regional policy statement. You're allowed to have regard to other matters, and so the vision statement stands as one of those other matters that the consent authority can have regard to. But I wouldn't expect a commissioner or the court to put the weight on a vision statement that it would put on objectives and policies in the plan.
Thanks,
Essentially, yes. That's right.
Correct.
Because you might recall there are overarching objectives in that chapter anyway, strategic directions chapter. They have far more weight than this. They have weight, this doesn't.
Wasn't this what Sarah wanted?
Yes.
Not just Sarah, it came from the CJOG comments as well.
Yeah,
which
with
is
the joint.
multi-ministerial
Yeah.
agencies.
So, given that, why is there no enthusiasm from staff for this?
But from a legal point of view, Ma'am, it does create some risk for the council in that if there's been detailed consideration of the objectives and policies as being the most appropriate way to achieve the purpose of the RMA, and then you have a vision statement that sits kind of beside that, people can try and use the vision statement in a way to undermine or change the reading or the interpretation of the objectives and policies. So it creates from a legal point of view, it creates unnecessary murkiness to the interpretation of the core objectives and policies in the plan.
Well, I mean, it seems to me to be the opposite, really.
Against that,
Sorry.
though, the risk of it kind of like not having the meaning which the council would like to have. And like an example was this morning, our environmental committee had some information from ECAN actually about the hail. And if we take hazardous industries and the chemicals that they're trying now to clean up, if we were to incorporate, the prevention of in industrial areas, for example, to ensure that land remains clean and that polluters pay, if you like, or clean up after themselves. Should we not incorporate some of that concept in this as a strategic outcome, or could we not? Something like that. Anyway, that might be an example.
Well, while we're looking at here, though, I take your point totally that it would be good to, if the council wishes, to incorporate something like that in the district plan. The question for you is, where do you want to put it? Do you want to put it in a vision statement, or do you want to put it in the strategic directions chapter, which is supposed to give that overarching kind of vision for the way the plan operates? Or do you want to put it in another chapter that deals with natural hazards and contamination issues?
I would like something that speaks to ordinary people, and I think having a bunch of principles saying what we're trying to achieve with our district plan would be far more readable and accessible to them. And as you say, the court might have regard to it, but it won't be ultimately guided by it. Pauline? Oh.
So perhaps as an example, Councillor, the hazardous substance contaminated land, if you go to objective 366, which is about amenity, health and safety, and B of that is the protection of people and the environment from the adverse effects of contaminated land and hazardous substances. It's there already in the strategic directions, and it will get reinforced in the contaminated land hazardous substance chapter. So from our point of view, we don't see the vision as actually adding any more than what's already in there in the plan. Yep.
I guess I would just sort of agree with Leanne's point that, in fact, some of these things which we want to be proactive in and
Yes.
proactive on, that having them clear among alongside as a strategic outcome, I think could be useful for people to read. It also means that we mean business rather than having it sort of buried further back in the chapter. But as long as we can do that legally.
Yes.
None of these principles deal with that issue of contaminant.
No, so that's one I've taken that you want added in. Yes.
Right. Yep. Yep.
I just think you need to listen really carefully to what staff are saying, which is the risk for our community is that we have a set of strategic outcomes that are not objectives, that the legal people and the experts of the people that want to breach our rules, breach our policies, breach our strategic directions, will then argue as an excuse to get around what they need to do. And I think what you need to understand with, actually part of the problem with the previous rules and objectives and policies is that they're so wide that basically, like, how long is a piece of string? You have these ridiculous arguments in the resource consenting phase, which mean it's really hard for the community to actually ever challenge some of the rationale behind things because, depending on what part of the district plan you read, you can justify pretty much doing anything. And so to me, that I kind of hear the staff saying, well, there's a real risk that the lesser definition you have around what you're trying to achieve in a broad sense, the greater the risk that people can argue to get adverse outcomes that you might not actually want. So you're better to have more tighter definitions so that people have that certainty.
And I, for one, Yanni, don't want to add any legal liability to us as a council. So if there's no way of doing it, perhaps we can't. But I just wondered if staff might be able to. I don't know.
If I might just add to that, Madam Chair, one of the sort of underpinning guiding principles that we've had to this whole district plan review, the approach is to create a more slimline document. So under the Act there is a section that outlines what must go in a district plan, and that is only objectives, policies and rules. And then there's a whole suite of other things that you could choose to include if you wanted to, which are currently in our operative plan and in many other plans, which adds to the bulk and the excess material that needs to be read, I guess, to understand the objectives and policies. We've tried to get right away from that, slimline it right down, and have the bare objectives and policies and rules there and nothing else that could create interpretational complexities that may not be necessary. You rely on the Section 32 for that. So the slimline factor and the certainty factor are two of the reasons why we hadn't considered having a vision in there, and we're promoting this on the basis that it's been requested.
Tell me why they requested it.
Was it clear to you?
Well, you had a discussion with them. I can't remember. I had a piece of paper that used to tell me all the reasons why they put up, but I haven't brought it down here. So just remind me, why did they want this in here?
I suppose one of the reasons was because we're doing this perhaps in two phases, it was a bit hard to see what the outcome or the shape of the city was looking to be. So they were looking for a statement which sort of says, from a land use point of view, what's the city going to look like, rather than having to read all the various chapters to form that overall view. So that was really the basis for it. We would sort of say, the zoning maps give you a very clear indication of what the shape of the city is going to be. We've defined this commercial centres, the suburban centres, we've shown the industrial areas, we've identified those areas where we're looking to intensify residential. So the text of the plan along with the maps actually, well, to me, and I'm sorry I'm a planner and been involved in it all the way through, is the shape and what the form and function of the city looks like is very clear. We've got a roading hierarchy which sets out the strategic transport routes. So all of those things are very clearly set out. We've identified all the hazards very clearly on the planning maps, and those with the policy about hazards indicates where we're looking to not encourage development. So that, to me, that's all there. It's in the plan, but what was looked for was sort of like a one-pager.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like
This is what it
executive
is.
summary.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, if I can also just add to that,
Can't we just write on a statement that says this is
Part of the plan.
Yeah,
not
we
to be
can.
read as part of, you know, I mean...
well, it won't be read as part of having any actual legal effect, but yes, we can write that kind of rejoinder.
I mean, why not just establish it? I mean, rather than this, I mean, I always imagined that we would have a set of principles that's the overarching glue. It's what binds the document together, but it's a simple summary of what it is that we're trying to achieve.
And I would say that already is there in the strategic directions chapter, which is not a long chapter.
It's a chapter. I mean, in a page, you know, literally looking at this page of principles with a one or two added, but essentially a clear statement of what it is we're trying to achieve. We're saying we want well-defined urban edges. I think that, I mean, some of these principles, I know that you've taken them from. Some of them come from the LURP, and I think it's it's a bit.
Well, this is why we have brought this to you. In a sense, it's almost like an executive summary document, and it is written for people who don't want to read the rest of the plan. What I would hate people to think is they can read this and think that it's going to give them everything they need to know because it's a legal
Who
document.
would think that, though? I mean, seriously. I mean, no one would think that they'd read the rules that they were required to meet.
You might be right. We've got it for you for your consideration.
Well, maybe if it's our vision statement, we should take it offline for a while and have a go at what we're trying to achieve. I mean, I actually think it is worthwhile having something that introduces the plan in a way that describes what the plan contains, but doesn't add to the plan anything by way of, you know, a guidance tool. I mean, I remember the recovery strategy, the Greater Christchurch Recovery Strategy, that it has three introductory chapters, but states at the end of chapter 3 that it is only chapters 4 till 8 or whatever it is that are the recovery strategy under the legislation. So, I mean, there must be a method of, I just call the whole thing just the introduction and don't even call it.
Well, indeed, there is an introductory, we call them chapters, but there is an introductory section to the plan which is for information only, which holds no, rules within it. Potentially, this vision could go into that part.
That makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then it addresses the concern that you're
Yeah.
raising, and you're legitimately raising the
That's
concern
right.
because, I actually used to be a lawyer as well, so I do get, and I've never been a planner, so but I do like maps because I'm
maps,
kind of
right.
visual there
Yep.
as well. So, what I'm worried about is that in being risk averse in that regard about the potential legal consequences, we may miss the opportunity to make what is a planning tool for professionals impenetrable for the ordinary resident of the city who actually might quite like to know what principles have guided the development of the plan.
Given that, what you've just said, that it could go into the introductory chapter, for want of a better word, do you still wish to take this offline and to talk further about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we'll get the wording and play around with that.
Okay.
But yeah,
Can I make a suggestion by way of process for that? The legal risk is avoided if what's put down for the principles mirrors the key objectives in the plan. Okay, if it's the same objectives written in a different sort of way, a more user-friendly sort of way, then it reduces that risk of someone using the vision statement in a way to expand the objectives of the plan. So perhaps if officers were able to come up with a draft of what they see as those key strategic objectives pulled out of the plan, and then if the council in seeing those think that, well, hold it, it's not doing X or Y,
Yeah,
then that's a problem not only with the vision statement,
it's a
but
problem with the plan.
with
Yeah,
the plan.
that's right. Okay, so would staff be able to pull together the sort of thinking of each of the objectives
Yes.
under each of the chapters
Absolutely.
as points of principle,
Correct.
and then that will identify if there are gaps, or in fact if we've got the wording of the plan right.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and we'll try and get that done within the next 24 hours so that we can actually bring it to you. We'll I don't know if you wanted to have the discussion here or whether you wanted to take the councillors and deal with it.